Hey guys, Jeremy from the Seeds of Liberty podcast again, with another installment of Abolitionist Abstractions. I'll start off this week by giving an update on last week's installment. I wanted to take a video from that location so I could show you the quote-unquote progress, but unfortunately this week there was chainsaws in almost every corner of that neighborhood. No matter where I walked, it was just rather obnoxious, so I decided not to do that. So we picked another neighborhood, so I just have to take my word that things have been progressing. But it's Thursday again. I was in that neighborhood all week up to this point, and I noticed the concrete had finally been poured yesterday, Wednesday, which is a full week and a half after the original project started, when they ripped the concrete up and just left it there. The interesting thing about that to me is that in that time frame there was only two what could be considered inclement weather days for pouring concrete. One of those happened to be on a weekend when the actors of the state, or the contractors that they hire to become actors of the state temporarily, don't actually work. So there was only one day in that time frame that they actually couldn't do work on. Still took them a week and a half to do the job. And the concrete's poured, but everything's still sectioned off, so it's still not technically open to the public yet. Maybe by next week it'll be open and ready for use. But that once again is just government in action. 2 weeks to fill in one section of concrete for a sidewalk. You know, the other sections were a little larger, but the original one that I showed last week was only one little section. Took them, like I said, it'll probably be almost 2 full weeks before it's finally ready for public use again. This is what happens when you have a monopoly on certain services. Or in this situation, I guess it would be more accurate to say a monopoly on control of these situations, since the local government often subcontracts the work out to people who aren't officially agents of the government, but they become so by proxy. So they have the monopoly on control, we'll say. And this is what happens, and it's funny because, you know, many a statist on both sides of the paradigm will claim they're afraid of evil monopolies, and that's why, you know, that's one of the reasons we need government, is to prevent us from the evil monopolies taking over, completely ignoring the fact that government itself is one of the largest monopolies ever created. You know, in whatever sector they touch, whether it's a direct monopoly or, as I was describing, you know, a monopoly on control, they have that monopoly, but most people don't want to see that. You know, which is interesting, because in most other facets of life, competition is viewed as a good thing. You know, sports. Without competition, the sports just kind of cease to be sports and end up just being a bunch of people standing around. But, you know, most people will look at that and say, yes, we want choice. But then when you talk about these other things, like the roads / sidewalks, law enforcement, quote-unquote public education, they don't want the choice. Or they don't think they need the choice. They think it's already been taken care of. You know, it's interesting. I was having a discussion on our YouTube channel the other day with someone who, interestingly enough, shared our video, but then critiqued the heck out of it and was basically saying that, you know, we didn't really know what we were talking about. But the one thing he said that I thought was interesting was that it seemed like we were just talking for the sake of talking because we're dealing with issues where the problem is already solved. And that made me scratch my head and laugh at the same time, because how is it solved? You know, you have one entity that offers whatever it is you're talking about. I think he was referring to the roads in particular, because it was on the comments were under our episode that we did on the common rebuttals to voluntarism. And so he was talking about the roads and how we're trying to, you know, reinvent the wheel essentially. But and when I asked how could the problem be solved, he managed to deflect away from that. Because most people will just say that, oh, it's already solved, it's already taken care of. But when you push back and, you know, ask for clarification or have them explain how it's solved, as with most instances in dealing with government and its sycophants, they have to use circular reasoning to try to explain themselves, and then they just keep getting deeper and deeper until they get frustrated and don't want to talk to you anymore. So I just found that interesting, because, you know, saying the problem's already solved is sort of along the same lines as the political rhetoric that gets thrown around in certain situations, you know, like the climate change issue, for example, where we're often told it's settled science, and so many things it's already settled. Well, no, there's people out there that dissent, so I don't know how settled it could be. But that's the overall opinion of a lot of people. They think government already provides certain things, which again is funny because government doesn't actually provide them. They just extort money from the public at large under the guise of taxation, and then either subcontract the work out, so government isn't actually doing anything other than robbing people in the first place and then paying the contractors with stolen funds, or they quote-unquote create jobs within the government to be able to do these things. But again, that's not really government doing the work. It's individuals who work for the government, but they are paid through the same extorted funds, which leads to, well, at least for somebody like me, leads to the next logical question. Well, what do you need government for exactly? Because they're just the middleman in this whole deal, and a rather expensive one, and can often be viewed as somewhere between evil and incompetent. But again, most people don't want to question that. They want to think that, you know, competition isn't necessary in these industries because it's already taken care of. It's interesting though, because, you know, the average person, you ask them if they would prefer to have one cell phone carrier in their location or 5 cell phone carriers. Many people will immediately jump and say, well, of course I want, you know, 5 would be better. And if you press and ask why, you know, common answers are, well, you know, if one is offering a better price, one is offering, you know, some kind of package that I prefer, one has nicer customer service, you know, better customer service, you know, all these factors go into it. If you only have one cell phone carrier, you're kind of out of luck if they don't provide very good service, or if they rip you off, you know, or promise you that they're going to give you service for the contract you sign with them, and then do some backhanded stuff, and then you don't have much of a recourse because they're the only game in town. You know, but when it's government that you're talking about, oh, that becomes a different issue, totally separate. People don't want to discuss that. That's not a monopoly because we are the government, and all that nonsense, which I always find funny when people say that, but to me it's even more interesting, because when you talk about, we are the government, well, if that's true, why are there laws in place that the average individual will be punished if caught doing or whatever the case may be, but if an agent of government gets caught doing the same thing, whether it's through the use of political euphemisms like, turning theft into taxation, turning slavery into conscription, peace into war into peace, that whole deal. Why is it that government agents are often not punished, or punished to a much lesser degree than the average person would? If we really were the government, wouldn't it stand to reason that everybody would be treated the same way? Makes you think. Well, makes me think, at least. I wish more people would think about that. But again, it comes down to government being the only game in town. The oft-used appeal to antiquity, where, well, this is the way it's been, this is the way it's always going to be. Why bother wasting time on that? Well, I don't see it as a waste of time, but even if you want to try to use that line of reasoning that it's a waste of time, well, I'm just going against history, We have 5,000 plus years of recorded history, with the state in some form or another. And the track record is pretty crappy. Overall, I'd have to say it's hard to argue with that. The belief in authority, which powers the state, has caused the deaths of more people than any other causes combined in the history of the world. Whether that authority is a government or a religion, a particular god, more people have died in the names of these supposed authorities than have died of any other causes. And that's a pretty crappy track record. I'd like to think that we can do much, much better. And that starts with getting competition for government. Opening up avenues where individuals or private companies can get a shot at rivaling government services, where we can actually put these theories to work and show other people that, yes, a private company can do a better job, will almost always do a better job, because without the monopoly in the way, keeping them down through regulations, taxation, and arbitrary edicts, not allowing certain people to provide services for whatever reason. It usually just boils down to stopping competition, but governments on every level will throw out rhetoric. It's for the children, it's for the old people, we got to protect this, we got to protect that, but they're just protecting themselves. So, what we need to do is get this competition in there, but again, because of these regulations, because of the arbitrary edicts, it is illegal to start companies like this. If I wanted to start my own sidewalk repair business, for instance, I'm sure my local government would have a big problem with that. There was a story in my town a couple of years ago of a gentleman who got so fed up with how horribly the roads were being maintained and how long they were taking to fill potholes. You know, because we have a process here where if you see one, you can call into the town and report it, and somebody's supposed to go check it out, and then they'll decide whether they can afford to fix it with your money, or how long it will take to fix. So this gentleman got fed up waiting. I think it was one of them he had called about like multiple times over an 8-month span, and nobody ever showed up to fix it. So he got himself a bunch of dirt and a shovel, and he went out in his street and he patched up a bunch of these holes. And I mean, he packed dirt in there and drove over it with his car multiple times and really packed this stuff down there. So it was about as solid as it could be, without using, you know, the crappy filler patchwork that the state does normally. Everybody in the neighborhood was quite satisfied because now they weren't swerving to avoid these potholes, and they could drive down the street a little less unencumbered. But the town got wind of this, found out who did it, threatened the guy with jail time for interfering with town business, and then proceeded to finally send a crew out just to rip up what he had done. They literally took taxpayer money to come out and redo a job, and they actually did it a poorer job than this gentleman had done. But that's what they waited for. They waited till somebody else solved the problem, then they came in and got to double charge the taxpayers, one charge for ripping up the work this gentleman had done, and a second charge for finally patching the holes that he had been requesting for almost a year at that point. And the kicker was that they threatened him with jail time just for trying to take care of his community. Like, and that goes on in towns, cities, localities, states, all across the country. You know, it's government's way or the highway. And that's just sad. You know, people try to take care of their own, people try to take care of their communities, and they're threatened with punishment for it because they didn't go through the proper channels. So, you know, that's what happens when you try to compete with the state. They literally throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at you to stop you from doing it. And the number one reason why? Because if the average person figured out that work could get done more efficiently and more cost effectively than what they're currently being charged by the state to do the same work, the love of the state would run out in a hurry. Even the most hardcore statist would be hard-pressed to find justifications for much beyond national defense. And, I don't know. Past that, you let competition in. I don't know what else they'd be able to cling to. But, you know, that's why the state has to step down on these things. That's why they have to squash the individual who wants to be, you know, whether they want to be an entrepreneur or whether it was somebody like this gentleman I was describing who literally just wanted to make the local commute safer and more pleasant for him and his neighbors. You know, can't have that competition, you know. But the politicians will still get out there and scream how they're protecting the rest of us from these evil monopolies, which is just, again, funny because they are a giant monopoly. Competition's good, except in this area. We can't have competition, you know. And to me, the funny thing about that is like, you know, hearkening back to the conversation I was having on YouTube. Somebody says, the problem's solved. We don't need to worry about that anymore. Government's got it under control. Well, that's just a cop-out because you don't know any different. That's all you know, so how could you possibly say it's solved? Maybe there's a better option. But no, let's not think about that. Government's already got it under control. Well, to me, saying that a problem is solved because government is already handling it is kind of like saying that you have a baseball team, but you've now changed the rules so that nobody else can actually play with you, and then you declare yourself champion anyway. Yeah, government. It's a lot like that. So, I think that's about all I got for today. Appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned for the next installment. Again, this has been Jeremy from the Seeds of Liberty podcast, and this was Abolitionist Abstractions. Peace.